Harrison Caldwell believed he was the untouchable king of New York, viewing his quiet wife, Audrey, as little more than a charity case he had graciously rescued. His arrogance peaked on a stormy Tuesday in October when he kicked her out with nothing but a trash bag, laughing at her tears. However, his confidence blinded him to a single, fatal detail on the property deed. He wasn't the owner. By the time he realized whose signature actually secured the estate, it was too late. This wasn't just the end of a marriage. It was the total dismantling of his life, the ultimate backfire. The dinner party at the Caldwell estate was, by design, an exercise in cruelty. It was October 14th, 2024, the kind of autumn night in the Hudson Valley where the fog rolls off the river and swallows the world whole. Inside the mansion, a sprawling 12,000 square foot brutalist masterpiece of glass and steel perched on a cliff edge. The air was warm, scented with expensive Pinot Noir and the metallic tang of ambition. Harrison Caldwell stood at the head of the mahogany table, swirling a glass of 1996 Chateau Margaux. At 42, Harrison was the picture of modern American success. He was the CEO of Vertex Capital, a hedge fund that had made headlines for its aggressive short-selling of pharmaceutical stocks. He wore a bespoke Tom Ford suit that cost more than most people's cars, and his smile was a shark's grin. All teeth, no warmth. Seated around him were the vultures of his inner circle. His CFO, David Thorne. A few sycophantic junior partners, and, conspicuously seated to his immediate right, Isabella Ricci. Isabella was 24, an Instagram model, with 2 million followers and a penchant for diamonds she hadn't bought. She was wearing a red dress that was less of a garment and more of a declaration of war. She had her hand resting casually, possessively, on Harrison's forearm. And then there was Audrey. Audrey Caldwell sat at the opposite end of the long table. She was 38, but looked older tonight, her face pale and drawn, her blonde hair pulled back in a severe, unfashionable bun. She wore a simple grey dress that Harrison had told her made her look like a governess. She was staring at her soup, a lobster bisque she hadn't touched. "You know," Harrison said, his voice booming to ensure the entire room fell silent, "they say marriage is a partnership. But let's be honest, gentlemen. In business, when a partner stops contributing capital, you buy them out." "Right, David?" David Thorne chuckled nervously, glancing at Audrey. "Harrison, maybe now isn't the time." "Nonsense!" Harrison slammed his wine glass down, a little too hard. Wine sloshed onto the white linen tablecloth. "We're all friends here. And Audrey knows the score. Don't you, darling?" Audrey looked up. Her eyes were a startling, clear blue, usually filled with a soft kindness that Harrison found irritatingly weak. Tonight, they were unreadable. "What score is that, Harrison?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "The score where I make the money. I build the reputation. I buy the houses. And you," he gestured at her vaguely with his fork, "you exist. You occupy space." Isabella giggled, hiding her mouth behind a manicured hand. "Oh, Harry, stop. She tries her best." The disrespect hung in the air, thick and suffocating. The staff, silent, uniformed figures moving in the shadows, stiffened. Mrs. Higgins, the head housekeeper who had been with the estate for decades, tightened her grip on the silver serving tray so hard her knuckles turned white. She looked at Audrey with a desperate, protective intensity. But Audrey gave a microscopic shake of her head. "Not yet." "I've been thinking," Harrison continued, emboldened by the wine and Isabella's perfume. "I need a life that reflects my current status. Vertex is up 40% this quarter. I'm on the cover of Forbes next month. I need energy, vitality." He squeezed Isabella's hand. "I need a partner who matches my trajectory." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a thick manila envelope. He slid it down the length of the table. It hissed across the linen and stopped inches from Audrey's soup bowl. "Divorce papers," Harrison announced, And a non-disclosure agreement. I'm being generous, Audrey. There's a check in there for $50,000. Enough to get you a nice little apartment in, I don't know, Queens? Ohio? The room went deathly silent. Even the sycophants looked uncomfortable. This wasn't just a break-up. It was a public execution. Audrey didn't open the envelope. She simply placed her hands flat on the table. You're ending our marriage. During dinner. I'm ripping off the Band-Aid, Harrison sneered. And frankly, I want you out tonight. Isabella is moving in. We're redecorating. Your antique taste is depressing everyone. Tonight, Audrey repeated. It's raining, Harrison. It's nearly midnight. Call an Uber. He dismissed her. Pack a bag. Leave the jewelry. I bought it. It stays. Leave the car keys. Just take your clothes and get out. Mrs. Higgins stepped forward, unable to stop herself. Mr. Caldwell, surely you can't mean. Shut up, Higgins, Harrison barked, or you're out on the street with her. Anyone who has a problem with how I run my house can leave. Audrey stood up slowly. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She looked down the table at the man she had been married to for 10 years. She looked at Isabella, who was smirking triumphantly. Very well, Audrey said softly. I'll pack. She turned and walked out of the dining room. Her posture was perfectly straight. See? Harrison laughed, pouring more wine. Weak. No fight in her. That's why she was poor when I met her, and that's why she'll be poor again. She doesn't have the killer instinct. He raised his glass. To the future. The guests toasted, but the air in the room had shifted. It was colder now. Upstairs, in the master bedroom that overlooked the Hudson River, Audrey moved with methodical precision. She didn't pack the Louis Vuitton luggage Harrison had bought her for photo ops. She reached into the back of the walk-in closet and pulled out an old, battered leather weekender bag, the one she had arrived with 10 years ago. She packed 2 sweaters, a pair of jeans, her toiletries, and a small, framed photograph of an older man standing in front of a library. She didn't touch the diamond necklace on the vanity. She didn't touch the Cartier watch. She changed out of the grey dress into black slacks and a trench coat. She checked her phone. She sent one text message. It's done. Initiate Protocol B. She walked downstairs. The dinner party was still raucous, loud laughter echoing off the marble walls. She slipped out the side door into the driving rain. Harrison was waiting for her under the portico, smoking a cigar. He wanted one last gloat. Uber is 5 minutes away, he said, checking his watch. Don't come back begging, Audrey. I'm changing the codes in the morning. Audrey looked at him, rain dripping from the brim of her coat. For a second, a flash of lightning illuminated her face, and Harrison felt a strange chill. She didn't look like the mousy wife anymore. She looked formidable. You really should read the documents you sign, Harrison, she said. Her voice was steady, cutting through the sound of the thunder. I read everything, he scoffed. I'm a shark, Audrey. You're a minnow. Goodbye. A black sedan pulled up the long, winding driveway. It wasn't an Uber. It was a Bentley Flying Spur, blacked out with diplomatic plates. Harrison frowned. Who is that? The driver, a massive man with a scar running down his cheek, got out and opened the rear door for Audrey. He bowed his head slightly. Miss Pembroke. We are ready. Pembroke? Harrison squinted. That was Audrey's mother's maiden name. She never used it. Audrey got into the car without looking back. As the heavy door thudded shut, she rolled down the window halfway. Enjoy the house, Harrison, she said. While you can. The Bentley peeled away, disappearing into the dark, wet night. Harrison stood there, cigar ash falling onto his shoes. He felt a sudden, inexplicable knot of anxiety in his stomach, but he shook it off. She was just trying to scare him. She probably rented the car to save face. Pathetic. He turned back to his mansion. His mansion. He walked back into the dining room. She's gone, he announced. Now let's get the real party started. Isabella put on some music. But the music didn't start. Instead, the lights flickered. Once, twice, and then the entire estate plunged into absolute pitch darkness. "What the hell?" Harrison shouted. "Higgins, the generator! Why didn't the backup kick in?" From the darkness, a voice spoke. It wasn't Higgins. It was calm, male, and unfamiliar. "The generator has been remotely disabled, Mr. Caldwell." Harrison fumbled for his phone, turning on the flashlight. He swung the beam towards the doorway. Standing there was a man in a dark suit holding a clipboard. Behind him were 2 uniformed security guards, but they weren't the private security Harrison paid for. They wore patches that read Pembroke Trust, Asset Protection. "Who the hell are you?" Harrison demanded, stepping in front of Isabella. "Get out of my house!" The man adjusted his glasses. "I am Arthur Sterling, legal counsel for the Pembroke estate, and I'm afraid you are mistaken, Mr. Caldwell. This is not your house." "Are you insane?" Harrison laughed, though it sounded shrill. "I bought this place 5 years ago. I paid $20 million for it. You paid $20 million into a leasehold renovation fund," Sterling corrected him, his tone bored. "You really should have read the fine print of the purchase agreement, Harrison. You don't own the land. You don't own the structure. You don't even own the furniture you're standing next to. You were a tenant on a month-to-month probationary lease." Harrison felt the blood drain from his face. That's impossible. My lawyer's—" "Your lawyer, Mr. Hughes, was recommended to you by Audrey, wasn't he?" Sterling smiled thinly. "He works for us." Isabella shrieked. "Harrison, what is he talking about? Is this true?" "It's a lie," Harrison roared. "Audrey is a nobody. She was a waitress when I met her." "Audrey Pembroke," Sterling said reverently, "is the sole heiress to the Pembroke steel fortune. She was waitressing as part of a social thesis for her PhD in sociology. She wanted to understand how arrogant men treat women they perceive as powerless. You, Mr. Caldwell, were her final case study." Sterling checked his watch. "The lease was legally terminated the moment you served divorce papers. Clause 14, Section B. Infidelity and abandonment nullify residency rights immediately." "So," Sterling motioned to the guards, "you have 10 minutes to vacate the premises, or you will be arrested for trespassing." Harrison looked around the dark room. His guests were backing away, phones out, recording everything. The humiliation wasn't Audrey's. It was his. "You can't do this," Harrison whispered. "We already have," Sterling replied. "Oh, and Mr. Caldwell, the Bentley took Miss Pembroke to her other home, the townhouse on 5th Avenue. She suggests you try the Motel 6 off the interstate. They have vacancies." The rain was relentless. Harrison Caldwell, formerly the master of the universe, found himself standing on the wet asphalt of Route 9, clutching a bottle of Chateau Margaux and his cell phone. Isabella was screaming at him from the passenger seat of his Porsche, the only thing they had let him take, and only because it was leased in the company name. "You said you owned it!" Isabella screeched, mascara running down her face. "You said you were worth $100 million. "I am." Harrison slammed his hand on the steering wheel. "This is a mistake, a glitch. I'll fix it in the morning. I'll sue her into oblivion." He tried to start the car. The engine sputtered and died. He tried again. Click, click, click. His phone buzzed. A notification from Vertex Capital Fleet Management. Alert. Vehicle lease terminated due to violation of morality clause. Remote disable activated. Recovery team en route. "No," Harrison gasped. "No, no, no." Isabella looked at the notification on the dashboard screen. She looked at Harrison, soaking wet, shivering, defeated. The shark looked like a drowned rat. "You're broke," she whispered. "You're actually broke." "It's a temporary liquidity issue," Harrison pleaded. "Isabella, baby, just call an Uber. We'll go to the Four Seasons." Isabella laughed. It was a cold, cruel sound. She opened the door. "I'm not going to a hotel with a loser, Harrison. I have a reputation." She stepped out into the rain and began walking towards the lights of a gas station down the road. Isabella, wait! She didn't look back. Harrison was alone. He sat in the dead Porsche, the luxury leather feeling cold and hard. He pulled out his phone to call his CFO. David, call failed. He tried to check his bank balance. Face ID recognized. Access denied. Account frozen by court order. He stared at the screen. The time was 1 a.m. 3 hours ago he was a king. Now he was a man trapped in a metal box on the side of the road, realizing that for 10 years he hadn't been the one playing the game. He had been the pawn. And Audrey? The woman he thought was knitting sweaters and reading romance novels? She had been holding the remote control the entire time. Harrison woke up at 6 a.m. on a pull-out couch in his assistant's studio apartment in Hell's Kitchen. He hadn't slept. He had spent the night staring at the ceiling, the smell of stale cat litter and cheap air freshener stinging his nose. His assistant, a terrified 22-year-old named Greg, was making instant coffee in the kitchenette. "Mr. Caldwell," Greg squeaked. I have to leave for the office. Are you coming?" Harrison sat up, his bespoke suit wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot. The events of the previous night felt like a fever dream. The mansion, the Bentley, the darkness. "Of course I'm coming," Harrison snapped, standing up and smoothing his jacket. "I'm the CEO. I have a crisis to manage. Get me a tie. Any tie." He arrived at the Vertex Capital offices in Midtown Manhattan at 7:30 a.m. He expected chaos. He expected lawyers. What he didn't expect was silence. The trading floor, usually buzzing with the adrenaline of pre-market analysis, was quiet. The analysts were at their desks, but they weren't looking at Bloomberg terminals. They were looking at him. Harrison marched straight to his corner office. "David!" he bellowed for his CFO. "Get in here, now!" David Thorne appeared in the doorway. He looked impeccable, rested, and strangely calm. He wasn't holding a notepad. He was holding a security badge, Harrison's security badge. "David, explain to me why my corporate credit card was declined for a breakfast sandwich this morning," Harrison shouted, throwing his briefcase onto his desk. "And get legal on the phone. I'm suing Audrey for grand larceny, emotional distress, and fraud. She locked me out of the estate." David didn't move. He closed the door gently. "Harrison, sit down." "Don't tell me to sit down. I made you." "Harrison," David's voice dropped an octave. It was the voice used for a funeral. "You need to look at the cap table." David slid a tablet across the desk. On it was a pie chart of Vertex Capital's investor breakdown. "What is this?" Harrison squinted. "We're backed by the Archipelago Group, Redstone Ventures, and—" "Wait." He zoomed in on the largest slice of the pie, 65% of the fund's capital. It was labeled the PE Trust. "PE," Harrison whispered. "Pembroke Estate. We ran the background check this morning after we got the cease and desist," David said, loosening his tie. "Archipelago Group. It's a shell company owned by Audrey Pembroke. Redstone Ventures, a subsidiary of Pembroke Steel. Harrison. She's the limited partner. She's the money. All of it." Harrison felt the room spin. "No, I raised that capital. I pitched those investors." "You pitched her proxies," David corrected. "She's been funding your entire career, Harrison. Since day one. Every time you thought you landed a whale client, it was just her moving money from her left pocket to her right pocket to make you feel important." Harrison slumped into his Herman Miller chair. The realization was physically painful. The genius trades, the empire he built. It was a sandbox she had built for him to play in. She triggered the bad boy clause in the partnership agreement at 8 a.m., David continued mercilessly, because of the public scandal, which, by the way, is trending on Twitter thanks to Isabella. The majority shareholder has voted to remove the CEO for cause. "Remove me?" Harrison laughed hysterically. "I am Vertex. The algorithms are mine." "Actually," David swiped to the next page, "according to the intellectual property addendum you signed 3 years ago, In exchange for that bonus, all IP created during your tenure belongs to the majority shareholder. Harrison remembered that document. He had signed it while drunk on a yacht in Saint-Tropez, celebrating a record quarter. He hadn't read it. He thought it was a tax form. "Get out," Harrison whispered. "I can't," David said. "It's my office now. The board appointed me interim CEO 5 minutes ago." David pressed a button on the desk. 2 security guards entered. They were the same men from the mansion the night before. "Please escort Mr. Caldwell from the building," David said, turning his back, "and confiscate his phone. It's company property." By noon, Harrison Caldwell was a ghost. He stood on the sidewalk of 5th Avenue, stripped of his phone, his wallet, his car, and his dignity. He had $40 in cash that Greg had slipped him out of pity. He needed a lawyer, a real one. Not the corporate shills who worked for Audrey. He walked 6 blocks to the offices of Baskins and O'Malley, a firm known for vicious divorce litigation. He demanded to see Richard Baskins, an old drinking buddy. The receptionist, a young woman who usually greeted him with a flirtatious smile, didn't look up from her screen. "Mr. Baskins is in a meeting." "I'll wait," Harrison said, leaning on the desk. "He's in a meeting for the rest of the year, Mr. Caldwell," she said, her voice icy. "And we cannot take your case due to a conflict of interest." "What conflict?" "We represent the Pembroke Foundation in their philanthropic endeavors," she said. "Please leave, or I'll call the police." Harrison stumbled back out onto the street. He was beginning to understand the geometry of the trap. It wasn't just a cage. It was a labyrinth. Every exit he turned to had been bricked up years ago. He needed an ally. He needed someone who didn't care about money or reputation. He needed Isabella. She was shallow, yes, but she was feisty. She had millions of followers. If she told his side of the story, how he was blindsided, how he was the victim of a crazy, vindictive heiress, he could win the court of public opinion. He borrowed a phone from a confused tourist by claiming an emergency and checked Instagram. He found Isabella's profile. She had posted a story 10 minutes ago. It was a video of her sitting in the back of a chauffeured Rolls-Royce. She was wearing sunglasses and sipping champagne. "Hey guys," Isabella chirped into the camera. "Just wanted to clear up the rumors. I am absolutely single. I was briefly associated with a man who turned out to be a total fraud, like lying about everything. But you know me, I'm a survivor. Big things coming. #single life, #boss babe." The next slide was a photo of her holding a new handbag, a Hermes Birkin. The caption read, "Thanks to my new bestie for the retail therapy. At Audrey P_official." Harrison dropped the tourist's phone. The screen cracked. "Hey!" "Oh!" the tourist yelled. "You owe me for that!" Harrison ran. He ran until his lungs burned and his expensive Italian loafers blistered his feet. He ended up in Central Park, sitting on a wet bench, watching the pigeons fight over a crust of bread. He was hungry. He hadn't eaten since the lobster bisque he ignored at dinner. A shadow fell over him. He looked up, expecting a police officer. Instead, he saw a woman in a sharp beige trench coat holding a Starbucks cup. It was his sister, Beatrice. Beatrice was the failure of the family. She was a public school teacher in the Bronx. Harrison hadn't spoken to her in 3 years because she refused to invest her savings in his fund. "You look like hell, Harry," Beatrice said, not unkindly. "B," Harrison croaked. "I need help. I need a place to stay. Just for a few days, until I liquidate some assets." Beatrice sighed and sat down, keeping a polite distance. "You don't have assets, Harry. Mum called me. She saw the news." "Mom is hysterical. Listen, it's a legal misunderstanding." "It's not," Beatrice said. She pulled a folded newspaper from her bag. The New York Post. The headline screamed, "Hedge Fund Kingpin or Pauper, The Secret Life of Harrison Caldwell." "They have everything, Harry," Beatrice said. "The fake credentials, The fact that you didn't actually graduate from Wharton. You just took a certificate course. The Ponzi-like structure of your early deals. It's all out there. Harrison felt numb. Who gave them this? An anonymous source, Beatrice shrugged, but we both know who it is. She reached into her purse and pulled out a sandwich wrapped in foil and a subway card. I can't let you stay with me, Harry. My husband, he hates you. After you made fun of his truck at Christmas 4 years ago? He said if you ever showed up, he'd break your nose. She placed the sandwich on his knee. But here's lunch, and a ride to the shelter on Ward's Island. It's not great, but it's dry. The shelter? Harrison stared at her. I'm Harrison Caldwell. Not anymore, Beatrice said, standing up. Now you're just a guy who treated his wife like garbage and got caught. Goodbye, Harry. She walked away. Harrison watched her go, then looked down at the sandwich. It was bologna on white bread. He took a bite. It tasted like ash. While Harrison Caldwell was sitting on a damp park bench, staring at a half-eaten bologna sandwich that tasted like sawdust and regret, Audrey Pembroke was sitting in a room that smelled of centuries of power. The library of the Pembroke townhouse on the Upper East Side was a sanctuary of silence. It was the kind of room Harrison would have hated. Dark wood, Persian rugs worn thin by generations of footsteps, and shelves lined with first editions that were actually read, not just displayed for aesthetics. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting long, dancing shadows against the velvet drapes that shut out the grey, weeping city. Audrey sat in a high-backed wing chair, a cup of Earl Grey tea resting on a saucer that was older than the United States. Across from her, the machinery of Harrison's destruction was laid out on a mahogany coffee table. Arthur Sterling, the family's consigliere, adjusted his spectacles. He was a man who looked like he had been born in a 3-piece suit. Beside him sat Silas, a private investigator whose nondescript appearance was his most expensive asset. The asset freeze is absolute, Sterling reported, his voice dry as parchment. We've successfully triggered the morality clauses in all 3 of his major liquidity providers. The Porsche was repossessed 20 minutes ago near the George Washington Bridge. The driver, a Miss Isabella Ricci, abandoned the vehicle and took an Uber. She also posted a rather scathing video about Harrison's financial instability, approximately 12 minutes thereafter. Audrey didn't smile. She simply nodded, staring into the fire. Isabella is efficient. I knew she would be. Greed makes people predictable, Arthur. It's the most reliable variable in the human equation. Indeed, Sterling agreed. The media saturation is at 90%. The narrative has shifted from shocking divorce to the fall of a fraud. The New York Times is running a piece on Sunday exposing his lack of a Wharton degree. They're calling it The Great Gatsby of Greenwich Village, but without the charm. Silas cleared his throat, sliding a grainy photograph across the table. He tried to contact his sister, Beatrice. She met him in Central Park. She gave him food and a subway card, but refused to take him in. He's currently heading towards the public library on 42nd Street. It's the only place open to the public where he can sit without buying anything. Audrey picked up the photo. In it, Harrison looked small. His shoulders were hunched, his bespoke suit was ruined by the rain, and his face, usually a mask of arrogant confidence, was twisted in genuine fear. He looks terrified, Audrey whispered. He is destitute, Miss Pembroke, Sterling said, closing his file. The trap has snapped shut. You have reclaimed the estate, the company, and your dignity. We can stop now. Let him fade into obscurity. Audrey stood up and walked to the window. She watched the rain streak against the glass, distorting the streetlights below. No, she said softly. It's not finished. If we stop now, he learns nothing. He'll think he was just unlucky. He'll think he was a victim of a bad market or a vindictive ex-wife. He'll spend the rest of his life blaming me, blaming the world, plotting his comeback. She turned back to the 2 men, her blue eyes hard as diamonds. He needs to understand why this happened. He needs to see the blueprint. I need a meeting, Sterling frowned. Miss Pembroke, I advise against it. He's volatile. He has nothing left to lose. A man in that position is dangerous. He's not dangerous, Audrey corrected him. He's broken, and a broken machine needs to be dismantled properly before it can be rebuilt. Set it up. Tomorrow morning. The Rose Main Reading Room. He's already there, isn't he? Let's meet him on his own ground. The New York Public Library was a cathedral of knowledge, a place Harrison had always dismissed as a homeless shelter with books. He had spent the night dozing in a bathroom stall, terrified of the actual shelter Beatrice had recommended. By 9 a.m., he was sitting at a long oak table in the main reading room, trying to look like he belonged. He had splashed water on his face and finger-combed his hair, but he couldn't wash away the exhaustion. His stomach rumbled loudly in the hushed silence. He was frantically sketching a business plan on the back of a napkin, a desperate, delusional scheme to launch a crypto consulting firm, when the chair opposite him scraped against the floor. He looked up. Audrey stood there. She looked radiant. Not in the flashy, sequined way Isabella did, but in a way that screamed quiet, untouchable luxury. She wore a cream-coloured cashmere coat and a silk scarf. She carried no purse, no phone, just a single thick manila folder. Audrey, Harrison breathed. He stood up too quickly, his chair clattering. A librarian shushed him from across the room. "Sit down, Harrison," she said. Her voice wasn't angry. It was terrifyingly calm. "Audrey, thank God," Harrison whispered, ignoring her command and leaning over the table. "Look, I know I messed up. I know I was difficult. But you can't do this. You can't just erase me. I'm the CEO of Vertex. I built that firm." "You built nothing," Audrey said, taking her seat. "Sit down." The authority in her voice was new. Or maybe, Harrison realized with a jolt, it had always been there, and he had just been too deafened by his own ego to hear it. He sank back into his chair. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice cracking. "To gloat? To tell me I'm a loser?" "I want to show you something," Audrey said. She opened the folder. It wasn't legal documents. It wasn't divorce papers. It was a thesis paper. The title page read, "The Architecture of Narcissism, a Case Study in Manufactured Success and Moral Decay. Author, Audrey Pembroke, Ph.D. candidate, Columbia University. Subject, Harrison Caldwell, born Harry Caldwin." Harrison stared at the words. The letters seemed to swim before his eyes. What is this?" 12 years ago, Audrey began, folding her hands on the table. "I was looking for a subject. I wanted to prove a theory. My professors argued that success in modern capitalism was a result of merit, intelligence, and innovation. I argued that the system was so broken, so superficial, that a man with zero empathy, average intelligence, and absolute, unwavering arrogance could rise to the top if he was given the right costume." She tapped the folder. "I found you at that bar in the Lower East Side. You were waiting tables, telling a group of girls you were an investment banker. You were lying so effortlessly. You believed your own lies. You were perfect." Harrison felt the blood drain from his face. You picked me?" "I curated you," Audrey corrected. "I introduced you to the right people, my father's friends, though I never told you who they were. I funded your first investments through shell companies. I bought the suits. I taught you which fork to use. I wrote your speeches. I built the stage, Harrison, and I let you perform." "Our marriage," Harrison choked out. "The last 10 years. It was an experiment?" "The marriage was the variable I couldn't control," Audrey said, and for a second her mask slipped. A flash of genuine pain crossed her face. "I fell in love with the potential of you. I thought if I gave you security, if I gave you the world, the insecurity that made you so cruel would vanish. I thought the Harry, underneath the Harrison, would finally breathe." She leaned forward, her eyes locking onto his. "But I was wrong. Money didn't cure you. It amplified the rot. You treated people like disposable tissues. You cheated. You stole. And when you started shorting those medical stocks last year, betting on people dying so you could buy a bigger boat, I knew the experiment had to end. The subject had become a pathogen. Harrison stared at her. His entire reality, his genius, his self-made myth, was dissolving. He wasn't a king. He was a petri dish. "So that's it," he whispered, tears stinging his eyes. "You win. I'm dead. I'm starving, Audrey. I haven't eaten in 2 days. Is that the conclusion of your thesis? The subject dies in the gutter?" Audrey reached into the folder again. She pulled out a slip of paper. It was a check, a cashier's check from the Pembroke Trust. Harrison's eyes widened. He saw the zeros. $10 million. $10 million. He reached for it, his hand trembling. "Audrey! Oh my God! You're giving it back!" "Look at the date, Harrison." He stopped. He focused on the date line in the top right corner. October 15th, 2034. 2034. He looked up, confused. That's 10 years from now." "Correct," Audrey said. "This is the second phase of the experiment. Call it rehabilitation." She placed a second document on the table. It was a contract. "Here are the terms," she said, her voice shifting into legal precision. "This check is held in an escrow trust. It will be released to you on this date, 10 years from today, provided you meet 3 conditions." Harrison stared at the paper. "What conditions?" "1," Audrey listed, holding up a finger. "You must maintain steady, lawful employment for the entire decade. No consulting, no strategy, no gambling. Real work. Physical work or service work. You need to learn what labor actually feels like. 2, you must have 0 criminal convictions. No fraud, no petty theft, no scams. 3, she said, her voice softening slightly. You must live within your means. No loans, no borrowing from friends. You live on what you earn. You pay rent. You take the subway. You learn to be an ordinary citizen of the world you tried to buy." Harrison looked at the check, then at the contract, then at Audrey. 10 years, he shouted, his voice echoing in the vast hall. "I can't live like a peasant for 10 years. I'm 42 years old. I'll be an old man." "You'll be 52, Audrey said. "That's not old. It's just late. You're starting over, Harrison. Most people do it with nothing. I'm giving you a finish line. A $10 million finish line." She stood up, smoothing her coat. "The choice is yours. You can tear up that contract, walk out that door, and try to hustle your way back to the top. But know this, I will be watching. And if you try to scam anyone, if you try to hurt anyone, I will crush you again. And next time, I won't leave you enough money for a subway ride." Harrison looked at the check. It was a fortune. It was freedom. But it was also a prison sentence. "Why?" he asked, his voice breaking. "Why give me a chance at all, after everything I said to you?" Audrey looked at him, and he saw a glimpse of the woman who used to make him coffee in the morning, the woman he had called mousy and weak. "Because," she said, turning to leave, "I still believe the hypothesis might be wrong. I still want to believe that under all that ego, there is a human being worth saving. Prove me right, Harrison. For once in your life, do the hard work." She walked away, her heels clicking rhythmically on the marble floor. Harrison sat alone in the massive, silent room. The check sat on the table, heavy as a tombstone. He looked at his reflection in the dark wood of the table. He looked tired. He looked hungry. He looked nothing like the master of the universe he thought he was. Slowly, with a shaking hand, he reached for the pen Audrey had left behind. He looked at the contract. I, Harrison Caldwell, agree to the terms. He thought about the cold rain outside. He thought about the sneer on Isabella's face. He thought about the kindness in Beatrice's eyes when she gave him the sandwich. He uncapped the pen. He didn't sign it with his signature flair, the big, looping scrawl he used for autographing menus. He signed it carefully. Small, neat, humble, Harrison Caldwell. He folded the contract, put the check in his pocket, and stood up. He buttoned his ruined jacket. He had 10 years to go, and the clock had just started. The first 3 months of Harrison Caldwell's new life were a blur of physical agony and profound, ego-crushing humiliation. The contract he had signed with Audrey wasn't just a legal document. It was a ghost that followed him through the grey streets of Queens. He lived in a basement apartment in Astoria that was so small he could touch both walls if he stretched out his arms. The air smelled of damp earth and the heavy spices from the Greek kitchen upstairs. In his former life, Harrison would have called the health department on a place like this. Now, it was the only thing standing between him and the gutter. His first job was at a 24-hour industrial laundry facility. He worked the graveyard shift from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., hauling sodden, steaming mountains of hotel linens into massive steel washers. The heat was oppressive, a thick, soapy fog that clung to his skin and made his eyes sting. By the second week, his hands, once soft from manicures and holding expensive scotch, were raw, the skin peeling away in strips from the harsh detergents. Every night, as he walked home in the pre-dawn light, his back screaming in protest, he would reach into his pocket and feel the corner of the envelope containing the $10 million check. It was his talisman. But as the months turned into a year, the check began to feel less like a prize and more like a mirror. By the end of year 2, the Harrison, who had sneered at waiters, was dead. He had been replaced by a man who went by Harry. He had found a better job, if you could call it that, as a junior mechanics assistant at a logistics hub. He spent his days covered in grease, sliding under semi-trucks to change oil filters and rotate tires. The turning point came on a Tuesday in November. A driver had come in, a young guy no older than 25, screaming at the staff because his rig wasn't ready. The kid was wearing a knockoff designer jacket and checked his gold-plated watch every 30 seconds, belittling the head mechanic, a man named Joe, who had been doing the job for 40 years. "Do you know how much money I'm losing every hour this truck sits here?" the kid barked. "You're just a bunch of grease monkeys. You don't understand what real work looks like." Harrison, sliding out from under a chassis, looked up at the kid. For a split second, it was like looking at a ghost of himself. The arrogance, the hollow bravado, the desperate need to feel superior to the people providing him a service. "Hey," Harrison said, standing up and wiping his hands on a rag. His voice was gravelly, tempered by years of silence. "The man is working on your brakes, so you don't drive off a cliff. Maybe show a little respect." "Who are you?" the kid snapped. "The janitor?" "I'm the guy who knows exactly how small you feel inside," Harrison said calmly. The kid sputtered, but the look in Harrison's eyes, a cold, knowing weariness, shut him up. When the kid finally drove away, Joe looked at Harrison and handed him a lukewarm coffee. "You got away with the pricks, Harry," Joe said. "Where'd you learn that?" "I used to be their king," Harrison muttered, taking a sip of the bitter brew. In year 5, Harrison finally gathered the courage to visit his sister, Beatrice. He didn't call. He didn't want her to have the chance to say no. He simply showed up at her school in the Bronx at the end of the day. He stood by the chain-link fence, wearing a flannel shirt and work boots. When Beatrice walked out, she didn't recognize him at first. He had lost 30 pounds of executive weight, and his face was lined by the sun and hard work. "Bea," he called out. She froze. Her eyes went wide, and for a moment Harrison feared she would run. But then she walked over, her expression a mix of shock and pity. "Harry," she whispered, "you look different." "I am different," he said. "I wanted to say I'm sorry. Not for the money or the house. I'm sorry for being a terrible brother. I'm sorry I made you feel like you were less than me, because you chose a life that mattered." Beatrice looked at him for a long time. The silence was deafening. Then she reached through the fence and squeezed his hand. Her palm was warm. "You want to come over for dinner?" she asked. The kids are loud, and the house is a mess." "I'd like nothing more," Harrison said. That dinner was the hardest test of his decade. Beatrice's husband, a man who had spent 20 years in the FDNY, spent the first hour glaring at Harrison. But as the night went on, and they realized Harrison wasn't there to brag or ask for a loan, the tension thawed. Harrison spent the evening doing the dishes, properly this time, and listening to his nephew talk about his science project. He didn't mention the $10 million. Not once. The years began to bleed together. Year 7, Year 8, Year 9. Harrison was promoted to warehouse manager. He wasn't a CEO, but he was responsible for 40 people's livelihoods. He knew their kids' names. He knew who was struggling with rent and who needed an extra shift. He used his shark instincts not to exploit them, but to fight the corporate office for better safety equipment and higher wages. He lived in a modest one-bedroom apartment. He had a small savings account. He had a dog, a rescue mutt named Buster, who didn't care about his net worth. Then came the morning of October 15th, 2034. The alarm went off at 6 a.m., just like it always did. But today was different. Today was the end of the experiment. Harrison showered, shaved carefully, and put on the suit he had bought for his niece's graduation. It wasn't bespoke, but it fit well. He took the subway to the Upper East Side. The transition from the grime of the transit system to the polished marble of the Pembroke Foundation was jarring. He was led to the top floor. The doors opened to a conference room bathed in morning light. Audrey was there. She was older, her hair a sophisticated silver blonde, but her eyes were exactly the same, startlingly blue and deeply perceptive. Arthur Sterling sat beside her, looking like a relic of a bygone era, clutching a leather-bound folder. "Mr. Caldwell," Sterling said, his voice a dry rasp, "you are exactly on time." "Habit," Harrison said, sitting down. "We have reviewed the reports," Sterling continued. "Your employment records are impeccable. No legal infractions. No debt. You have, by all accounts, fulfilled the terms of the contract to the letter." Sterling slid the check across the table. It was yellowed slightly at the edges, having sat in a vault for 10 years. $10 million. Harrison looked at it. For 3,650 days, this piece of paper had been his goal. It was the win he had been chasing since he was a child. It represented the mansions, the Ferraris, the revenge against everyone who had seen him fall. He picked it up. The paper felt light, flimsy. "It's yours, Harrison," Audrey said softly. "The experiment is over. You can go back now. You can buy a villa in Tuscany. You can start a new fund. You can be the man you always wanted to be." Harrison looked at the check, and then he looked at his own hands. They were scarred, grease-stained at the cuticles, strong. He thought about his crew at the warehouse. He thought about Sunday dinners at Beatrice's. He thought about Buster waiting for him at home. He realized, with a sudden, violent clarity, that the man who wanted this check no longer existed. If he took this money, he would be inviting that ghost back into his life. He would be looking over his shoulder, wondering who was trying to take it from him. He would go back to the paranoia, the isolation, the hollow vacuum of status. "You know, Audrey," Harrison said, looking her in the eye, "for 10 years I hated you. I spent every night for the first 5 years imagining how I'd spend this money just to spite you." Audrey nodded. "I know. But then something happened," Harrison continued. "I started to like the guy who didn't have $10 million. He's a better friend. He's a better brother. He actually sleeps at night." He placed the check back on the table. He pushed it towards the center. "I don't want it," Harrison said. The room went silent. Sterling's jaw actually dropped. "Mr. Caldwell, this is $10 million. It is a legally binding disbursement. I'm not saying keep it," Harrison said. He looked at Audrey. "You said you wanted to prove that the system is broken, that people like the old me shouldn't be the ones holding all the cards." He stood up. "Take this money. Build a community center in the neighborhood where my warehouse is. Start a vocational school for the kids who think their only options are crime or poverty. Call it the Pembroke Caldwell Center if you have to. But don't give it to me. Audrey stood up. She walked around the table until she was standing directly in front of him. For the first time in 12 years, she reached out and touched his arm. "The experiment is finally complete," she whispered. "What was the conclusion?" Harrison asked. "That a man isn't defined by what he owns," Audrey said, a tear finally escaping her eye, "but by what he's willing to give up." Harrison smiled, a real warm smile that reached his eyes. "I think I'll go now. I have a shift starting at noon, and my lead mechanic is a real stickler for punctuality." He turned and walked out of the room. He didn't take the elevator. He took the stairs, feeling the strength in his legs, the rhythm of his heart. When he stepped out onto the sidewalk, the city was loud, chaotic, and beautiful. He didn't look for a limo. He didn't look for a Bentley. He walked towards the subway entrance, merging with the thousands of other people just trying to make it through the day. He was broke. He was a laborer. He was an ordinary man. And as he descended into the station, Harrison Caldwell realized he had never felt richer in his entire life. And that, everyone, is the final chapter of Harrison Caldwell's journey. It's a story that reminds us that the things we think define our worth, the titles, the mansions, the bank accounts, are often the very things that keep us from seeing who we really are. Harrison had to lose a mansion to find a home, and he had to give up $10 million to finally find his freedom. What's the biggest lesson you're taking away from Harrison and Audrey's story? Do you think you could have walked away from that check after 10 years of hard labor? Let's get a conversation going in the comments. I read every single one. If this story touched you, please give this video a like and share it with someone who needs a reminder that it's never too late to start over. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell. We have so many more incredible, real-life dramas coming your way, and you won't want to miss a single twist. Thank you for being part of our community. And remember, the most valuable thing you will ever own is your character. See you in the next video.